Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS News. I am here in studio with Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS. Alex, a historic, I would say, week here in Israel. Just absolutely unbelievable. The feelings of the raid on Entebbe from July 4th, 1976, with 4 Israeli hostages rescued in a major operation undertaken by the IDF, by the Shin Bet security forces, by the Yamam police, elite anti-terror police. 4 Israeli hostages, Almog, Meir, Jan, Andrei, Kozlov, Shlomi Ziv, and probably one of the faces of this entire war, Noah Argamani, all rescued in an unbelievable military operation there in central Gaza. Your initial reaction to the operation?
Well, obviously, Israel relieved to get any hostages back. That's what Israel wants more than anything else, the return of all of these hostages. And Israel really needed some good news. It's been weeks at a time going by where Israel's not necessarily certain of the gains being made inside the Gaza Strip, not seeing the taking out of the major Hamas leaders, not seeing the return of the hostages. So finally, on Saturday night, we get some good news that some of the hostages have returned home, and it creates hope that maybe some of the others will return home as well.
Unfortunately, you had a Yamam police officer, anti-terror officer, Arnon Zamora, who was killed. I think he was the first one in, and he was laid to rest yesterday in front of hundreds, married with 2 kids. Very sad that we did lose a member of our security team in the raid.
Yes, a similar situation to Yoni Netanyahu, who led the Entebbe raid. He was the commander and the first one in, and he was lost in that operation. And definitely bittersweet, to know that 4 hostages came home. But 1 soldier was killed, and you think about all of the soldiers that have been killed trying to rescue hostages over time, and you have this question, what life is worth more than another life? But as long as you think that you have the capabilities, the possibilities of saving a life, here in Israel, we value that possibility to all ends, and when we take the chance.
And they renamed the operation, the mission, in memory of Arnon. They called it Operation Arnon. And let's take a quick look at one of the video clips there of from the footage of rescued hostage Noah Argamani being extracted from Gaza. There you have it. Just so emotional watching that on Saturday night. There were rumors already circulating on Shabbat. I saw images of religious young women on the streets of Jerusalem and people who perhaps have their TV on Shabbat shouting out to them that they rescued the soldiers, and people dancing in the streets of Jerusalem, dancing on the beaches of Tel Aviv. And at the same time, if you turn to social media and you see some of the Israel haters out there, it turned into a numbers game. 4 Israeli hostages rescued, and you had at least, I think, 150, 200 terrorists or so-called civilians. I mean, it turns out at the end of the day, it is correct that they were being held by so-called civilians, a doctor and a journalist there in Gaza. They weren't being held in a dungeon or an underground tunnel by Hamas in somebody's house. Hamas paid these people to hold Israeli hostages, civilians, again, and the debate on social media, well, Israel killed 200 and Israel only got back 4. They should have taken a deal much earlier. And all these anti-Israel haters essentially trying to say, we want more dead Jews. That's really the bottom line, and that's why they're taking to social media. 4 rescued Jews, and Israel values every single life, and you see the difference between the good and the evil, and people trying to create some kind of moral equivalence there between what Israel did, targeting terrorists and so-called civilians dying in the process, and rescuing our own people. Israel's determined to go and get back each and every hostage, and this is the way we have to do it.
First of all, a government, an army, it's responsible to protect its citizens. Israeli citizens were kidnapped from their homes, in this case, from a Nova music festival. They were at a peace-loving music festival on the morning of a holiday during a vacation. They were taken into Gaza And the IDF has launched this war in large part, primarily actually, to get the hostages back. That's their mission, okay? And whatever they have to do to get them back. Now, if they would break into the house and people would put up the white flag and surrender and say, okay, yes, you found us, here's your hostages, there wouldn't have been a firefight, okay? But in fact, there was a firefight. Why? Because Palestinians were firing with guns, with RPGs. It was a very, very serious firefight that took place. And the IDF's mission is to, A, get the hostages, and B, to extract itself. And so whatever's going to happen. And if there are hostages that are being held by Hamas terrorists, Israel's going to fight those terrorists. And if there are civilians in the way because Hamas hides itself among civilians, because Hamas hides the hostages among civilians, then civilians are going to fall as casualties in this war. And that is the fault of Hamas, not the fault of Israel. But for all of the international community that was supposedly aligned with Israel on October 7th and said, we got to bring back the hostages home, when Israel goes and brings back hostages in a way in which makes all Israelis celebrate the great news, that international community that wants the hostages back say, well, okay, well, you can't bring back the hostages if you're going to kill the people that are holding the hostages. Like, what? It's Alice in Wonderland here, you know, to see the reactions of the international community when Israel succeeds finally in a mission to bring hostages home.
Yeah, and Hamas even shooting at the hostages on their way out. Reactions by the world community, the U.S. Praising the operation, but yet still saying that this must lead to a ceasefire. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken releasing a press statement talking about the release of the hostages, but also stressing humanitarian assistance to Gaza, the reconstruction of Gaza, an end to the war, and CENTCOM, the U.S. Central Command, also making it absolutely clear that the pier, the humanitarian pier, which has been a total disaster, the thing has floated away and just a complete joke. I think it was $240 million put into that, making clear that no, while the U.S. may have helped with intelligence, the pier wasn't used. Like, they're afraid that Hamas is going to target that very pier that they have sitting out there that's trying to bring them aid. And they want to make sure they distance themselves and say, no, the pier wasn't used during this rescue operation.
Well, it's not clear that there was any U.S. intelligence used in this specific operation. It was an ambiguous claim that the United States made, but the United States wanted it known by the entire international community that their pier would not be used in any kind of operation, even one which would bring the hostages home, while at the same time the United States always saying how important it is to bring all the hostages home. The United States should be doing everything in its power to be bringing the hostages home, and it seems like the only trick that they have up their sleeve to try to get hostages home is to try to pressure Israel into stopping its war, which they hope then would lead Hamas to release the hostages. Of course, no guarantees that would be the case.
One of the worst reactions I saw was from the European Union High Representative Joseph Borrell, who initially said something about how wonderful it is that the hostages were rescued, but then minutes later, hours later, what have you, called Israel's operation appalling. This was a post he had on Twitter, on X, calling it another massacre of civilians and saying it was appalling, condemning in the strongest of terms Israel rescuing its own. Absolutely despicable. The head of the European Union there, High Representative Borrell, on Twitter. And again, Borrell calling for an enduring ceasefire, an end to the killing. So he won't let us celebrate for a few minutes, automatically turning around and then putting the onus on Israel, blaming Israel for taking out these so-called civilians. And I can't say that enough, so-called. They had a journalist and a doctor who were holding our people. We go in there and save them, and we're still getting criticized by the head of the European Union.
Just so important to reiterate, and we've talked about it so many times. Yeah, hostages are being held in civilian homes. Most of the hostages that have been rescued from buildings, not from in the tunnels, okay? They're being held in homes, whether those individuals are affiliated with Hamas, paid off by Hamas to do that. Weapons, tunnel shafts, all come up in civilian homes, okay? They come up in hospitals, they come up in mosques, they come up in schools. There's no proof anywhere in the Gaza Strip that the civilians are not complicit in all of Hamas's crimes. They support Hamas's crimes. They voted for Hamas. And quite frankly, they would vote for Hamas again. And if there would be elections in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank and the Palestinian-controlled territories for who would govern those territories, there's a very good chance that Hamas would win that election as well. And that's the exact reason why the Palestinian Authority has not had that election. The Palestinian Authority has discussed reconciliation with Hamas and a unity government with Hamas. So the Palestinian people support Hamas. If they didn't, they would be turning in the leadership of Hamas to the Israelis. They would be putting the weapons that are in their homes, out in front and said, here, take them. We don't want them anymore. We don't want what Hamas has done. They support Hamas. The Palestinian people voted for Hamas. The Palestinian people are Hamas. And that I think that's the most important thing that Israelis understand, that the international community just can't wrap their head around.
And these people took part in October 7th. They took part in the massacre. They cheered when the Israeli hostages were taken back to Gaza. They cheered time and time again when rockets were fired at Israel throughout the course of the war. So let's be careful when we use that term civilians in terms of who we're really talking about.
And they're not getting out of harm's way. I mean, even in the battle, they will not leave. Like in Rafah, Israel told the civilians in that camp to move. They gave them a place to go. They set up tents and other places where they could refuge. They have stayed there on purpose in order that when Israel will attack in these areas, that the international community will say that it's a massacre. Every day, another massacre been committed in Gaza, another massacre, as if they had practiced this talking point over and over and over again. It's a war, and now that Hamas is proving that they can't defeat the IDF, but at the same time refusing to return the hostages, at the same time refusing to surrender, they just want the civilian death count to get as high as possible. And unfortunately, everybody's fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, as if they have as if they were complicit with this from even before October 7th took place. And Israelis are starting to get that picture. We saw it. Eugene Kontorovich, as an international lawyer, just put out a piece in the Wall Street Journal yesterday laying out how members of the International Criminal Court all came before the prosecution of their case against Israel with significant anti-Israel bias, all on record beforehand. It's like a kangaroo court system here in the international community. Everybody's getting the response the reaction that they wanted from the outset.
And if that's not enough, as this is all going on, I wouldn't call it a coalition crisis at this point, but certainly the Israeli government looks a little bit different this morning, with War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz announcing he and his National Unity Party are leaving the emergency wartime government. He basically, to make a long story short, he doesn't like the way Prime Minister Netanyahu, in his words, is handling the war. He, along with Minister Gadi Eisenkot and Chli Tropper, also submitting resignation letters following Gantz's announcement. Let's go ahead and play that clip of Benny Gantz.
לצערי, נתניהו מונע מאיתנו להתקדם לניצחון האמיתי שהוא ההצדקה למחיר הכואב והמתמשך. לכן, אנחנו עוזבים היום את ממשלת החירום. בלב כבד, אך בלב שלם. אנחנו מתייצבים היום למערכה על גורלה של מדינת ישראל לדורות קדימה.
So there you have it. No longer Minister Benny Gantz issuing his resignation. Netanyahu, the prime minister, saying Israel is in an existential war on multiple fronts. Benny, this is not the time to abandon the campaign. This is not the time to join forces. Netanyahu promising that we're going to keep going.
This is the time to join forces.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the time for unity, yet Benny Gantz decided that apparently Netanyahu didn't do enough, in his view, for him to justify staying in the government, along with Eisenkot. Eisenkot sending a resignation letter there, criticizing the way the panel handled itself, the war cabinet, during the war. So we're going to have, right now, again, there's enough. Netanyahu still has the majority, still has more than 61. So it's not, I wouldn't call it a crisis yet at this point. But it could lead, perhaps, if the war, this could be a precedent, perhaps, for some of the others to also abandon ship. I hope it doesn't happen. We're in the middle of a war. We can't deal with elections right now. But in your mind, how significant is the Benny Gantz departing from the government at this juncture?
It's definitely significant. It's not critical. but we have to see how this plays out. Remember that Prime Minister Netanyahu, after a fifth consecutive election cycle, him and his right-wing allies, including religious parties, including pro-settlement parties in Judea and Samaria, formed government together with Netanyahu. They wowed the electorate with 64 seats, creating for the first time in Netanyahu's tenure a fully right-wing government. Okay, this government is stable because all the coalition members are comfortable with the alignment. They want to stay in it. Now, when the war happened, Netanyahu appealed for unity. He said, we have to fight this war together. This isn't a right-wing war. This isn't a political war. This is a war that was brought upon the Jewish people in the state of Israel, and the entire country, right and left and center, have to fight this war together. Benny Gantz, who was Netanyahu's political opponent in most of these election cycles, heeded the call. He and Gadi Eisenkot, who were former chiefs of staff of the IDF, joined in the government and demanded the creation of a war cabinet of which they would be members. And so there was a 5-member war cabinet. Gantz and Eisenkot were 2 of the members, together with Yoav Gallant, who's the defense minister, Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, who's a confidant of Netanyahu, and Netanyahu himself. What happens now? 2 of the members have left the war cabinet. So we don't know what's going to be with the remainder of the war cabinet, if Netanyahu will fill this war cabinet. But it is understood for a while now that Gantz has been taking orders essentially from the Biden administration, from Antony Blinken. Just a couple of months ago, Gantz flew to Washington on a trip that was specifically not granted permission by the Prime Minister of Israel. Gantz met with Blinken. Gantz met with Kamala Harris, even in the Oval Office, I believe. Just days after that meeting, Chuck Schumer says there needs to be an elections in Israel, and Gantz met Schumer just a couple days before. So this is what Gantz and Schumer discussed. When Gantz came back, he said there needs to be an election in Israel. The first time he kind of broke discipline with the war cabinet and said we need to have an election. Now Gantz resigns on the eve of Blinken coming back to Israel again. And if you look at what the Biden administration has been trying to accomplish, they have been very clear. They've said it over and over again. They consider Netanyahu to be one of the major problems in the Middle East. They think that he's the problem online with, or maybe more so than the Islamic Republic of Iran, more so than or equal to Hamas and Hezbollah. They look at Netanyahu as the obstacle to peace. Of course, this is the man that signed peace agreements with Bahrain, with the Emirates, with Morocco, with Sudan, and has been a long-time statesman in the state of Israel. What I think that the Biden administration is trying to accomplish via Gantz and Eisenkot's resignation is they want to first, they think that it's going to crack the coalition. I think this is where they're wrong. The second thing, and I think that this is likely to happen, is that they will remove international legitimacy, whatever's left for the government, and now you're going to have all the haters of Israel say, see, even the centrists in that government who are really left-wing, who are really part of this, I would call it the deep rot of the elite military class in Israel that led us into this mess called October 7th. They've left the government, and now you just have only a right-wing and extremist government. And so they're going to continue the delegitimization campaign against Israel. They want to prevent this war cabinet from taking the war into Lebanon and defeating Hezbollah. The last thing that the Biden administration wants now is for the war to expand. They're trying to wind down the war in Gaza. Israelis understand that Hezbollah is next. Hezbollah has been escalating the attacks against Israel in the north. Israel knows they need to do something in order to be able to bring 80,000 residents back to their homes. The Biden administration doesn't want that, so they're hoping that by pulling Gantz and Eisenkot out of the war cabinet, out of the government, that will prevent Netanyahu from moving forward. The last thing that I think that you're going to see happen is the dramatic intensification of domestic protests against this government, like we saw last summer during the judicial reforms. Benny Gantz himself made reference to this in his resignation, saying that that he will be part of the demonstrations and that they're demonstrating somehow for unity. He alluded to unity even as he's pulling out of the unity government. So I do think it's a challenging moment. I think it's an opportunity for Netanyahu to reset his war cabinet, possibly to bring in some real professionals that have a better sense of how to win this war than Gantz and Eisenkot, who were taking their cues from the Biden administration. And we just have to see what Netanyahu's next move will be and what the fallout of this resignation will look like. You
would think from the surface that looking at the statement released by Gantz that he was actually shifting to the right, but that's not the case, as you just mentioned, that he's actually in cahoots there, if you will, with the Biden administration and their policies and what they seek to happen here in the Middle East. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But you mentioned Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He's getting on a plane for the 8th time coming to Israel. I wonder how many times he's actually visited the Sudan while there's a real genocide taking place there in Darfur where people are being massacred. I don't think he's gone there once. I could be mistaken, but he certainly hasn't gone there 8 times. And as he's coming here, the Biden administration is reportedly set to vote on an anti-Israel resolution at the UN Security Council. And David Milstein, our friend from the office of Ambassador David Friedman, pointed out that the anti-Israel resolution, which they're set to vote on, again, this is a U.S., if I'm not mistaken, U.S.-initiated resolution, has many shameful provisions, including embracing Hamas's position, imposing a complete ceasefire that would keep Hamas in existence to attack Israel again and again, as Hamas has promised. And there are many, many details of this resolution, but at the end of the day, it's talking about, and this is what Israel opposes, one of the main things that Israel opposes is the fact that the wording leads one to believe that they're talking about a permanent ceasefire, not a temporary ceasefire, as mentioned. It was supposed to be, according to Biden's plan, 6 weeks and then a second stage and whatnot. With this UN Security Council resolution, and it seems like we always say, like, the Biden administration can't get any worse in terms of what they're trying to do here. And week in and week out, they're finding ways to try to tie Israel's hands and keep Hamas afloat. And that's really the main problem. Our number one goal going into this operation was to make sure that Hamas is being removed. And then secondly, the hostages. And third, to make sure that Gaza is no longer a threat. But they're ignoring that first key. And many people are focused on, again, well, obviously we want all the hostages to be brought back home, but it can't be that Hamas is not completely dismantled at the end of this operation.
Yeah, so, I mean, you said Israelis thought it can't get worse. It can get worse, and it's likely to get worse. And I will tell you that I think that if there's a second Biden administration, that things will get much worse if the war is not finished. I think that the Netanyahu administration should count on a second Biden administration, has to count on a second Biden administration, regardless of what it hopes might be the outcome, and recognize that in the election season, that the Biden administration still has to maintain some sort of loyalty to Israel for lots of different reasons. And if they get past the election and they win, they're not going to have any of those motivations. So things could continue to get worse. The things about this UN Security Council resolution that are very troubling, as you mentioned, they don't call for the full removal of Hamas. They don't demand it. The second thing is that they discuss the creation of a Palestinian state in Gaza and what they call the West Bank, what Israelis call Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland of the Jewish people. Gaza was the pilot project of the independent Palestinian entity. If you want to know what a Palestinian state will look like, look at Gaza. That is exactly what a Palestinian state will be, because that was the provisional Palestinian state. And the third thing is that they said that the Palestinian state in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza should be ruled by the Palestinian Authority, which is something, again, as we said before, Israelis are completely and totally opposed to. But the real danger here is that the United States is allowing resolutions that Israel doesn't want to pass in the Security Council, and this is a snowball that is rolling down the mountain. And it's just getting bigger and bigger, and we're seeing that the language that's being brought before the UN Security Council keeps getting more and more and more anti-Israel as it goes, and the United States is now getting into the pattern of not using its veto and allowing these resolutions to pass. So the fear is that future resolutions will be more harshly worded, more anti-Israel even than this one. And the United States, which has for decades used its veto in the Security Council to protect Israel, is now abandoning Israel at the United Nations.
And speaking of the UN here, you have the United Nations lumping Israel with Hamas. The UN announced that Israel and the IDF will be added to a list of entities that harm children in conflict. Who else is on that list? Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, those type of terror organizations. So they are creating a moral equivalence between Israel and the evil, which is Hamas and the other terrorist organizations. Obviously, the moral compass of the UN, we know, has been pointing in the wrong direction for so many years. And here's just another move by the UN to delegitimize Israel.
The United Nations has not only passed more resolutions in its bodies against Israel than against all other countries, which would be bad enough. And anybody that's walked around Israel would know that this is not the worst place in the world to live. Okay, it's a country where you can feel safe, and if you don't feel safe, it's because there might be Palestinian terror, not because of anything that an Israeli is going to do to you. If you come here, Israelis are peace-loving individuals. Not only does the UN pass more resolutions against Israel than against any other country, the UN passes more resolutions against Israel than against all other countries put together.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have to understand what this body is, and the fact that the United States and France and Germany and all the Western Europeans, take this body, which is basically run by the Arab League, seriously at this point. It begs a lot of questions about where people are in terms of their own morality.
Here we have Israel's ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan. Here's his response to Israel and the IDF be putting on this blacklist of countries and organizations that harm children.
I am utterly shocked and disgusted by this shameful decision of the Secretary General. Israel's army is the most moral army in the world. So this immoral decision will only aid the terrorists and reward Hamas. And I have to tell you another thing. The only one who is blacklisted today is the Secretary General, whose decisions since the war started and even before are rewarding terrorists and incentivizing them to use children for terror acts. And now Hamas will continue even more to use schools and hospitals, because this decision, shameful decision of the Secretary General, will only give Hamas hope to survive and will only extend the war and extend the suffering. Shame on him.
Again, there you have Gilad Erdan, by the way, who I understand is actually the outgoing ambassador, and looks like Danny Danon, former Israeli ambassador to the UN, will be going back to New York.
Yeah, you don't see that happen too often. Danon was previously like a number 2 inside the Likud. It was a challenger inside the Likud to Netanyahu, and Netanyahu sent him there to become the ambassador to the UN. His English wasn't that great at the time. He went there. He did a really good job. He got very close with Nikki Haley, who at the time was the American ambassador to the UN. Who was one of the best defenders of Israel in that position, much better defender of Israel than the current U.S. ambassador to the UN, and now with Gilad Erdan serving his term and deciding to come home, Danny Danon going back to the place where he knows the landscape and did a pretty good job defending the Jewish state.
Yeah, I heard him in the Knesset a couple of weeks ago speaking to students who were here, those students from Columbia and other universities who were experiencing anti-Semitism. His English is certainly proficient. I think he's going to do a great job in his second stint over there. There's been another UN figurehead here. It actually pains me even to mention her name. I think we skipped her last week. This Francesca Albanese, the special rapporteur. Did we bring her up? I don't know if we brought her up.
It's not even worth it.
Should we just skip her? Accusing Israel of genocide, blah, blah, just joining the list of haters.
She's not joining the list of haters.
She's leading it.
This one
she's leading it.
She's been leading the hatred against the Jewish state
and she's
for years.
taking, from what UN Watch says, she's like taking these kickbacks,
That's
these
right.
speaking tours and all this stuff, which she's not supposed to do as an official representative of the UN. I hope they fire her, but I can't trust the UN to fire her. I give up on her. She's just an Israel Jew hater. Rafah, the operation is expanding. Let's check out this map here. IDF movement throughout Rafah, exchanges of gunfire on a daily basis, Israeli tanks and Hamas operatives, Israel preparing to expand, heading north and east into those neighborhoods in Rafah, making progress. And hopefully we will weed out all of the remaining Hamas battalions from Rafah as soon as possible.
Israel controls now the entire southern border, the Philadelphia corridor. They had captured most of that territory, and they were surveilling the rest of it. Now they've gotten all the way through. They're finding weapons. They're finding tunnel shafts. They're engaging in firefights throughout the city. The problem is, of course, that this is the place where most Gazans were temporarily residing as the IDF pushed them from north to south in the Strip. But Israel has telegraphed its attack in Rafah and has moved civilians out of Rafah into other places. And we know, as we've seen many times, and even the hostages that just came out were just rescued from the Gaza Strip, they said that they were moved from place to place, right, dressed as Palestinian women civilians. And so when you move the civilian population from Rafah elsewhere in order to be able to go into those buildings and find the tunnel shafts, to find the weapons, find the rockets that have been fired at Israelis, what happens is that alongside civilians, so-called civilians, are terrorists and are hostages. So it doesn't, going into Rafah isn't the be-all and end-all of the operation. It, in a way, it just moves the battlefield to another location to be fought later.
You mentioned this earlier, and we'll bring it up again. The situation in the north, we have, again, hourly rocket attacks. Yesterday, there was like a string of rocket attacks. Hezbollah targeting communities and towns and people and IDF soldiers in northern Israel. Like within 1 hour, it was just alarm after alarm after alarm. Biden administration warning Israel against extensive military action with Hezbollah in Lebanon due to risks of Iranian intervention and regional escalation, according to Axios, citing U.S. and Israeli officials. So according to the Americans, if Israel goes after Hezbollah, that will bring Iran directly into the war. I mean, I thought they were kind of already in the war when they fired 400 missiles and rockets and drones at the state of Israel about a month and a half ago. But the U.S. again issuing warnings against Israel not to go all in on taking out Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Again, the U.S. really doesn't want Israel to go into southern Lebanon, but we have to be clear about it. The United States has been engaging in shuttle diplomacy to try to calm that border down for months and months and months. They sent their envoy, Amos Hasten, to the region to try to get control of the situation in southern Lebanon. The situation has only gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. The idea that the state of Israel is absorbing the sheer quantity and intensity of the attacks from Hezbollah, it really is a head scratcher. And we know that Israel doesn't want to fight two fronts at the same time, but there's a war going on. You know, they're using a terminology like that this is below the level of a war taking place. This doesn't look like it's below the level of war. Sure, Hezbollah has not fired their long-range precision-guided rockets. Sure, Israel has not put ground forces inside southern Lebanon in large numbers. There have definitely been small incursions of troops into southern Lebanon. It's not the full-fledged all-out war, but this is a war, and it's happening, and Israel has to restore calm, has to return its citizens to their homes in northern Israel. Essentially, Israel's lost its sovereignty in northern Israel. Hezbollah knows it. Hezbollah is testing, and as long as the United States is telling Israel to, as long as they're telling Israel to not expand the war, Hezbollah is going to keep firing at Israel and keep testing and seeing exactly how much they can get away with. Because quite frankly, there's no repercussions for them.
At the same time, speaking of trying to get away with things, the Houthis, again, at it once again, firing at a UK vessel 2 days ago, and I just heard reports this morning they're firing at a United States, a U.S. vessel, and holding 9 UN employees hostage there. I don't know, maybe, have you seen the UN go crazy about 9 of their people being held? I mean, I think they're too busy condemning Israel's operation to get back our hostages to care about their own employees being held in Yemen there, or wherever they're being held.
They're blaming Israel for launching an operation into Gaza, which is the reason why the Houthis are attacking Americans and commercial ships and everything.
It's all our fault.
And nobody's willing to connect these dots. It doesn't take too much to connect the dots to realize that Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis are all armed and funded by Iran. Iran is the world's largest state sponsor of terror. They operate through proxies. These proxies call for death to Israel, death to America. They're attacking Israel. They're attacking American interests. This is a war between Israel and Iran and its terror proxies, and yet it doesn't suit the interests of the international community, Western countries who have been providing the money to Iran, which it's been using to attack Israel. So they don't want to stop that. They just want to frame this as just some latest round of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and say that what has to happen is the creation of a Palestinian state after the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust.
Thank God there are people who are seeing through that, namely the U.S. Congress and the population there in the United States as their representatives in Washington understand the reality about what's going on. And we are nearly out of time here, Alex, but you know where I'm heading straight from this broadcast? I guess you probably don't know. I'm going to the cheese store. There's a cheese store about 5 minutes away from the studio, and I'm going to pick some very, very special cheeses because it is the holiday of Shavuot this week, where it's a limit in terms of the number of customs. It's not Passover, it's not Sukkot, but one of the customs of the holiday is to eat dairy products, and there are many reasons for that. I'm not going to get into all of them now, but I'm very excited to head to the cheese store and buy some high-quality Israeli cheese in preparation for the holiday.
Yeah, Shavuot is one of the three major festivals in the state of Israel. It was traditionally and biblically a harvest festival here, but it's also the anniversary of the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, where God came down onto the mountain and pronounced the Ten Commandments, which are global and eternal commandments. This is one of the greatest revelations of morality in the entire world, and all Judeo-Christian values, and even Islam, also bases the idea that Moses was a prophet, and that this revelation was given. It's a tremendous spiritual light that comes down into the world that we celebrate and rekindle. And the Jewish people need this light right now, and I think, quite frankly, the whole world needs this light. They need to see a bit of a revelation of truth, because we're, as you know, constantly reporting on just the widespread dissemination of lies and false narratives, and it's time for the truthful narrative to be shown once again on the world. Shavuot, it's a good time to remember that.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm in Israel now 22 years. One of the most unbelievable experiences I've had was walking to the old city of Jerusalem at about 5 o'clock in the morning on Shavuot morning to celebrate the children of Israel receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai. You just see people coming from all the alleyways and all the different neighborhoods gathering and making their way to the Western Wall in Jerusalem. If you're in Israel, I highly recommend it. And if you're not in Israel, come join us. It's a lot of fun. Even with all this craziness, it's definitely the place to be.
Certainly want to wish everybody a Chag Sameach, a happy festival, and a meaningful festival as well.
Yeah, here in Israel, Tuesday night and Wednesday, America has an additional day, and the rest of the world has an additional day. But Chag Shavuot Sameach, and continue to pray for our IDF soldiers who are protecting us 24/7. Shout out to Ryan Lifshitz for everything he does behind the scenes here. Go to JNS TV and check out all of our amazing programming, and also go to jns.org for all up-to-the-minute coverage, everything taking place in Israel and the Middle East. My name is Josh Hasten here with Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS. We are in Jerusalem, the capital of the state of Israel, and the Jewish people. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Chag Shavuot Sameach.